Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another map analysis video, and this map should look familiar to you if you're already familiar with the series, but I figured I would start with something that I'm already somewhat familiar with myself. This is Feast by poLemin. It's a defusal map. It's got 2 bomb sites, like a good defusal map should have. No need for 3. I don't know why anybody thought that was a good idea. And we're going to be traipsing on through. So the last time that I recorded a video for this particular map, I don't believe it had received the final amount of changes, but this map has actually stayed relatively true to form, and I don't know what poLemin's been up to lately, but I am quite content to do another video, do another pass-through of this particular map, walk people through everything all over again, and hopefully get some more people interested in actually playing this map among other maps. So this was actually an honorable mention in the Map Core finalists of the recent contest that happened. You guys have already been playing a lot of the maps that happened there, the Exotic Places mapping contest. That's where Swamp, Anubis, Mutiny, and there's probably one other that I'm forgetting, Chlorine. That's the one. Those are the 4 that, as of this recording, have been added to the map pool in some capacity or another, for some amount of time or another. I know it's been a few months, and now here we are, hopefully. Valve decides to take a look at the backlog here because I think Feast could be a very competitive map, much like Basalt, which I had high praise for in the past, and maybe we'll get somewhere with it. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, this is one of those maps that you might see in the future, so you can think of this as a bit of a preview, depending on how soon it actually gets implemented. So, as we traipse our way through the T-spawn area into the entrance to A, it should be noted that there are a few different areas to go in this particular case. This lower area is a very noise-obvious read if anybody's holding the proper spots on the CT side, but it does wrap around and give you a nice vantage point into A itself from a bit of an elevated position, though it should be noted that while you can jiggle peek certain angles over here, you are not going to be able to do too much once you actually make the few steps over here. This is very much a committal area. It seems like a small detail, but you need to commit your way out of here if you're going to get anywhere close to the bomb site or anywhere close to any other cover. So it's a really interesting position that sort of punishes people if you're going to try to, say, all-out apps or something similar to Mirage on B-site, where you're going to be running out of B-site apps trying to waterfall down onto any counter-terrorists that might be there. If you're just going to full flat rush, you probably don't want to take this angle because, for one, it's very tight. You know, you can really at most fit 2 people in here before you start smashing into each other. And even then, 2 people probably going to smash into each other anyway, just because we all know the kind of teammates we have in pugs. So, or any sort of game like matchmaking. So you don't really want that. But yeah, once you actually drop down here, you're still kind of in no man's land. So that's one of the other reasons why you would probably want to rush out the main entrance over here, which we will take a traipse back down. I guess I'll get my knife out instead of the Glock. So essentially, when we took our, right-hand side path over here, we would just divert over here to come to this main entrance into A. So, it's a fairly straightforward approach to the site. I think that maybe there's a few issues with perhaps a lack of decor or obvious pointing. It does feel like a little bit like moving around for no reason, and not really interesting gunfights to be had over in this particular area. Now, I know not every area needs to have the potential for interesting gunfights, but this is one of those areas where it definitely feels like there could be a little bit of change to it to make it a little bit more straightforward. If it is just meant to be a connection between one area and another, you could probably shrink the distance of that connection, or you sort of add value. You don't want just filler areas to your map, of course. So that would be one criticism, one bit of critical analysis that I would levy at this particular map. But otherwise, when we come out here, it's fairly straightforward. You got to jump down. It's an interesting tactical decision. You'd probably only want to stick one guy over here for lurking, or for particularly angling into this little porch area over there that I'll show off a little bit later, because that is going to be a crucial spot. I imagine CTs will almost always be using this to rotate, even if they don't have anybody over here holding A from this angle, and they will probably be focused on that spot. So that'll be like an interesting duel, generally speaking, just up here staring down here, probably by the doorway, but you could take a really aggressive off angle potentially, something like over here, right? You could take this off angle and zoom in, take a shot, and then actually jump out though you got to be careful that you don't get destroyed along the way, because it is a long travel time down to these boxes. Obviously super easy to get back in here after the fact, but again, does take some time, take some jumps. If you call your mind back to all of those optools you may have had on Mirage at the back of middle, from the terrorist perspective, you are going to be scoping into Sniper's Nest. You don't want to ever jump up on the box in the middle of a duel, right? Because it takes so long for you to regain accuracy. It's kind of a similar deal here, except you're not even going to be using this in the context of a fight. You're mostly just trying to move from one area to the next. So that's another area where this lurk position could be super powerful if you end up posturing towards A while most of your team is trying to make a B hit work. And, you know, you start to see some rotations from the site. Somebody holding site decides, all right, I'll just take this sort of risky but quick rotation up towards the back of the CT spawn area to get to B, and suddenly I'm getting shot in the back by a lurker. You know, maybe you can call yourself Get Right or something, but I don't know. You might end up like happy if you keep doing it every round. You know what I'm saying? So don't do that. But here we are. This is A site. It's got a lot of cover, as you can see. There's going to be a huge number of gunfights on the site, which I think is in stark contrast to B site, which is something that I've always appreciated when you have a nice little duality there, where sometimes the gunfights are in approach to the site, other times the gunfights are literally on the site. You think of Mirage B site, that's a gunfight on the site type of thing, whereas A site on Mirage is still got plenty of gunfight potential on the site itself, but a lot of on the way there, you're going to be dealing with gunfights at contact points. Whereas, yeah, in theory, you can do gunfights at contact points here, but once people learn the utility, once people drop a couple smokes, maybe a smoke like right over here, from over there, you can throw smokes over there, so it's pretty trivial to find some sort of lineup if you feel like being in here for a while in an empty server looking for that stuff god B style. And it should be pretty trivial for people to find some sort of smoke that blocks the vision of anybody who's holding from here. I think this would even block somewhat the vision of somebody who is standing here. Not completely, like if you were all the way over here, and obviously if you were coming out from the upper area anyway, but if you were all the way by the scooter, you could probably be seen just a little bit, and you're going to get shot at from anybody who's holding back of sight all the way over here anyway. But, you know, so there's going to be gunfights over here, but really I think the big gunfights are going to be on the site itself. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe once we actually see some more people playing on this, it might come to the point where it's very obvious that, hey, actually what we need here, or what we see here, are, you know, once people are on the site, the gunfights have mostly been resolved. So it's quite interesting, I think, as far as a quote-unquote puzzle goes, to figure out what's actually going on there. I like the fact that you can step on this. It never made any sense to me that you can't step on this. Of course, immediate points off for not being able to step on this, but that's because that's part of the thing that stops you from escaping from the map. So I guess it makes sense. It's just a consistency element, right? And of course, you can't jump over here. That would be too broken. This is the CT perspective of entering this particular porch. I really like the porch area. I think it adds a nice little dynamic. And you may have noticed, if you were being observant earlier, that there's actually a little side alley over here, which is a nice connection on the low ground. This is a safer rotation if you're confident that no Ts are in mid. This is actually a safer rotation to get all the way to B site, if you can remember how to mouse wheel up so that you don't fail the jump there. So this is actually like the middle area. This is the equivalent of Sniper's Nest, perhaps. The CT side of mid that looks out into the main contact point there. Mid control, obviously in a 3-lane map, you're going to expect it to be pretty valuable. So as you traipse on down from CT spawn into this middle area, you know, you should be expecting some op duels over here. Double op setup would probably be one guy here or one guy on this side and then another guy on B. I'll show you where that would probably look like later. But I like the flexibility in that you can pretty much have op duels across, you know, every single site as well as mid. So there's a couple of different positions for oppers to play. And of course, double op setup, maybe even triple op setup, depending on the economy. Probably not going to happen for CTs just because we all know how fucked the CT economy is lately, but that's okay. Maybe it can happen. Just fuck it, man. Do a Fnatic all over again. So at this point, you should be asking yourself, what kind of angles can you take in mid? Well, as soon as you come in, you'd be scoped up over here, because on the T side of this, instead of going all the way to A, we're going to traipse over here to mid, and this is basically your contact point, right about here. You know, maybe a little bit closer. Because CTs, if they're actually going to hard push you mid, can get pretty far out in the early stages of the game. Maybe not around here, maybe a little bit further back, but they can definitely get into a position and use a lot of the cover that poLemin has scattered around in the middle area here to make life a little bit hellish for the pushing Ts. So that's one of the really interesting things about this particular middle is CTs themselves are actually encouraged to jump out ahead and try to get some mid control themselves in a more aggressive manner. Insofar as if you were a CT holding over here, obviously probably not with an op just because you're going to get destroyed, but if you were holding, you could definitely zero in on that barrel over there, which is the entry point into B from mid, and basically watch for flanks, right? So you have to be cognizant of that as a T. If the CTs know what they're doing, they might have somebody over there, especially if they're being aggressive. You know, they're trying to fake you out with some utility usage over here. They might drop like a smoke or something right about here, just to try to keep you sort of reined in. And yeah, again, you know, once people learn NATO lineups on this, it's going to morph the options available quite heavily. But obviously, of course, you could see somebody creeping up here. This kind of reminds me of one of the very many iterations of Vertigo from Valve, which unfortunately has gone through so many iterations now. I have no idea what the current version even is. I gave up trying to keep tabs on it because it just seems so pointless. They just kept changing it so heavily every month. But basically, one of the areas in middle, you actually were encouraged to climb up top of and shoot people from. And I'm sure it was quite annoying for the people who were getting shot by that. But in this particular case, I think it might be a little bit more fair because you're so very exposed, and you. I don't think you have to make noise. Yeah, you don't have to make noise to get up here. So you could do it silently, but I think you are very exposed once you get on here. The surface area of the thing that you're jumping on is a little bit wider than what it was, the giant pile of pallets and in Vertigo. So yeah, there's a couple of different balancing factors there, and of course maybe it does end up being a little too OP in certain characteristics, but I think you could probably find some sort of lineup to molly that, which would also cover anybody who is trying to hold this angle. So it's not without counterplay, it's just you got to figure out what that counterplay actually is. And so yes, this little rotation here allows you to long jump or crouch jump or fail jump your way up to look into B site, which is a nice little angle over here. And obviously these boxes stop you from seeing the people who would be rotating out from B long, but there's still a little bit that you can do from this angle. Notably, you can catch people out here, but you are super exposed in mid, which I really like. I think it adds a nice little, you know, limiting factor there for anybody who's trying to hold from a super safe angle. You have a very tight spot to actually catch the T's in, and that's only if they go here. There is actually a way for them to get into the site itself and plant on this lower ground. If they just walk straight over here, obviously. So as an opper, you're going to be stuck in a hard place, or between a rock and a hard place, perhaps, if you're not able to get into a really good position. And you kind of want to commit, but then you have very little cover to hide behind, especially if they wide swing out on the site itself, which of course is a different elevation level as you are trying to kite down here, which is going to change your elevation level. It's going to take some getting used to for oppers to try to play those high octane moments where they're potentially getting rushed down and stuff. But the potential is there, so I like it. I definitely like the whole dynamic that's over here. I think it adds a lot of strategy, and it's not too broken as well to just sit up here because, you know, you just leave one guy in mid holding for flanks, and suddenly this guy is dead meat as soon as he shows up there. So that makes sense to me. But we'll quickly finalize our mid overview. There's a little area over here that I'll show off in a second because that connects to a wider part of the map. And the interiors of the map, generally speaking, are one of the reasons why this map has so many different pathways and quite a bit more complexity than your average 3-lane map, I would argue. But I don't think that they are particularly wasteful. I think it's interesting in many respects. So this is that mid to B rotation. A bit of a labyrinth, but once you end up rounding all of the different corners, you're going to come into the first contact point. This is if somebody has dropped down from the mid to B area that I was just showing off earlier with the op. This is a situation where you're going to need to be watching for anybody who's like hiding behind that barrel, although they can't really hide behind it, but they might be holding from it. They might be holding from just like around this side or jiggle peeking you or something. And as you come in, it's super easy to get caught off the CT side of B, which is basically just this contact point that I'm scoped in on here. This area over here is very, very easy to sneak up on you basically because it doesn't really feel like an immediately intuitive angle. So you got to kind of learn that. Then when you get into the actual site proper, and as you can see, it only gets more confusing and potentially deadly from here. You could have somebody who's holding behind the box over here. Unlikely if they don't have anybody, looking truck, which I'll show off later. That's that B long area. But they could have somebody over there. They could obviously have somebody even holding all the way over here. And they could certainly have people in a few different spots on the site. So there's a lot of different angles you're going to have to check, a lot of different spots for utility to be useful. And certainly, as you get into the site further, you're going to have to keep checking. Over here, you might find some sort of smoke lineup that blocks off that sniper's position over there and forces them to either commit or stay outside, which is obviously going to be useful for you as far as information goes. And yeah, generally speaking, this is the site that I was talking about where most of the gunfights are going to be happening. Admittedly at contact points, just like I pointed out on A, but especially I think a little bit further out. I think just by virtue of the rotation to B that I'll show off in a second from the T side perspective, there's going to be more opportunity to make contact before the T's actually arrive at the contact points of the site itself. So this is really quickly the CT approach. You just come out here, you jump down. There's some neat little angles you can take for an op. I'm not going to linger too much on this, but you could take an angle over here if you were pushed out really far and you were expecting a rotation through here. That could catch people off guard, especially if they decide to jump on the truck on the way over. But obviously, otherwise they're kind of out of sight until they get around here, maybe a little bit further out. You can't really see them. So maybe around here is where you'd be able to see them. Generally speaking, a fairly reasonable position because obviously you are exposed to anybody who's coming in from another angle, similar to the mid one. But certainly some place that you're going to need to watch out for if you're rotating CT and you don't have eyes on where exactly they are. Like you don't have anybody else lurking on the actual site itself, and the T's have full control. So you got to watch out for that. Makes sense to me. But yeah, that's the CT approach. So now we'll show the T approach real quick. And you may have noticed that the T's themselves have quite a wide area over here. I think this is fine just because it's not a huge trek to move through. It is if you're rotating all the way through T-spawn. This actually kind of reminds me of Mirage's T-spawn area, where if you're going from like Palace or something all the way to B, that's the kind of rotation it is to go from like the hay cart at the A entrance on the T side all the way back to T-spawn, all the way to B from the angle that I'm about to show you. So it's kind of reminiscent of that for me. So anyway, you would run out here. You could take this little jump spot over here, which takes quite a few jumps to get a little bit less than I actually did. I did one too many there, but then you're in this rather complex layout, we should say. It should be noted that that can be spammed through the windows, I believe, but unlikely to actually happen because I don't think anybody's going to have an audio cue that you're going through there. Maybe they might do that just as a guess or something if they know that you're doing that. But this is what leads out to the T-side porch of mid, which can let you catch anybody who's rotating down here. This is probably a stronger spot for CTs than it is for Ts, but good luck actually accessing it in that respect. This, I think the best angle that you can take for this is if you end up pushing for information on the B long angle, which is what we're looking at over there. If you're a CT and you're coming out of this area to push for information and you don't see anybody here, you could actually take this position, sort of shift walk from this particular point onward. Obviously, you wouldn't want to give your sound cue away, and you probably want to start shift walking even earlier. You can jump up those boxes and barrels or whatever that I was jumping up on earlier without making any noise. So it should be noted that you can do that. Now then you get to this point and you can actually see into mid from this angle to see if anybody's pushing out to B. Obviously, even then it's not super useful because they could be going to A anyway, and you could also just throw somebody in mid and look down that angle that I showed about earlier, so it's not really that big of a deal. But you can also take this approach to come out this door, and this leads out to where you can either go to mid or A from the T perspective. So there's some utility there from a pushing CT, but the distance that they have to travel and the fact that they would not want to be giving away their sound cue makes it somewhat limited. I'm not really sure that you could do much about that, though, because obviously that's a mechanical aspect of the game. So I guess you could maybe add some other door or move this entrance to somewhere else that's a little bit more CT favored if you wanted to encourage pushing CTs. Because right now, even if they push all the way over here, they don't get a huge amount of reward. They get the information, but they can't really position themselves and leverage their position on the map itself into a better position for catching flanks. Maybe they can position themselves to lurk backwards if somebody were to take like the long rotation. They certainly could get some sound cues and stuff, but again, that's just information. They can't really do too much with that position, I don't think. So this is why I called it truck, because this B long area has this giant truck over here. This actually, I believe, did get changed, because before I believe it was a completely different asset. So this is one of the changes that I definitely recall, because I believe it was another SWAT truck or something originally. Much more reasonable to see around now, I must say. Much bigger fan of this particular asset being used. Also has some different clipping and stuff. You can jump on it a little bit easier than you could the SWAT truck from memory anyway. And obviously this is going to be a main contact point. This is one of the reasons why I think this B site has a lot more action happening around the contact points or the pathways into the contact points than the site itself, because of this particular area. And of course, because in order to get access to another angle of attack, you have to go through mid or you have to go through A, at which point, why didn't you just go A? So there's this is really the main coup de grace, or whatever, the piece de resistance of the CT defense for the B site. I don't know why I said coup de grace. That's probably not anything related to it. Some Frenchmen can yell at me in the comments or something. So this is really the centerpiece for the CTs. This is what they want to operate around, generally speaking. They probably want at least one guy here spotting, jiggle peeking around here maybe, and looking for some people. He could go super aggressive and jiggle peek over this way, but he could still be blindsided if they hug all the way the right side. So you got to be careful about that. I guess he could jump spot or something, but obviously that has its own fair share of problems, as anybody who's gotten one tapped out of Mirage B apps knows. So yeah, got to be careful about that. But then of course you can leverage this position once you do take it as a T to completely obscure yourself from the mid rotation using these boxes, and more or less can, you know, obscure yourself from more angles of attack otherwise. I mean, you got to clear all these angles and stuff, but it should be relatively easy to trade even if you do end up getting destroyed as the entry, because there's only so many places they can hide unless they full stacked. Odds are you're going to be able to crack this site open once you get to this point, which is one of the reasons why this is a site about the entryways, a site about the contact points, not a site about the site itself, until after it's already been taken. And even then, when the CTs are coming to retake it, it's pretty much the same dynamic. It's just from different angles. And obviously it's unlikely that they'll be retaking from B long just because of the lengthy rotation. So as a result of that, you should be expecting them to come from mid, from the B side mid, as well as the CT side mid, and then of course from CT itself. And maybe they can leverage that if they're in position to rotate through that big long apartment complex that we showed off earlier. Maybe they could, the CTs that is, leverage the fact that it's unlikely to be expected, but it is still a very long and risky strategy, because if you don't end up getting the right amount of time left on the bomb timer, you might not be able to do anything even if you do kill everybody. So yeah, definitely a tough ask, but B-side as a result, B-site rather, is definitely one of those things that I think once you secure it is much easier to remain secured. Sort of like Dust 2 B-site in that respect, where it's kind of hard to retake. Not quite as ridiculous in that respect, but certainly I think a harder retake to ask for than A, even though there's, I guess, equal or less than angles than A. It's just that A's fight is a little bit easier to get into a position to take, whereas in B's site, they could be lurking literally anywhere. They could be stuck away in many different positions along the way there. It's not just about what's on the site. So that's my analysis of this particular map. I don't think I missed any particular area. Pretty sure everything's all good. I guess this rotation can be used the other way to A side. Another reason why you want the mid control as Ts, and of course as CTs. I think that's pretty much it though. That's the only note that I missed. So since this map has not really changed that much, you probably didn't gain that much by watching this if you already watched the older version. But that's okay. We can't have them all be winners. This map analysis video is the first of many that will be uploaded to this particular channel. So subscribe for more if you like that sort of thing. I shouldn't have to tell you that, but YouTube tells me that I have to tell you that. So, you know, for this, just this once, I'll listen to Google. And that's about it. So yeah, stay tuned for more. Bye.